She had everything: money, fame, power. But when she met the man she once left behind, her heart remembered what success truly meant. This is the story of a woman who learned that real wealth isn't found in luxury, but in love, humility, and gratitude. It was a bright morning in the heart of the city, sunlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a luxury penthouse. The woman stood silently in front of her mirror, her reflection wrapped in elegance and control. She was a vision of success, a black business magnate whose face graced magazine covers, whose name echoed in boardrooms and charity circles. Assistants rushed in and out, stylists adjusted her dress, cameras prepared to capture her every step. To the world, she was power personified, but behind those calm eyes lived a silence she had long learned to carry, the kind that comes when achievements replace conversations, and applause replaces affection. As she gazed at herself, the faintest hint of weariness shadowed her smile. 10 years ago, she had been a different woman, full of raw energy, laughter, and impossible dreams. Back then, she and her husband had built their hopes from scratch. They didn't have much, just a little coffee shop on a quiet street, where dreams were written on napkins and love was poured between coffee cups. He used to tell her, "Success means nothing if you lose peace while chasing it." She would laugh, thinking he didn't understand ambition the way she did. But over time, she realized ambition was what drove her further, and also what drove them apart. The journey to success had been ruthless. Every new deal demanded sacrifice. Every victory came with a price. Her nights grew longer, her calls fewer, and their conversations became brief, polite, and eventually silent. He wanted a simple life, where love came before luxury. She wanted the world, and she got it. But in getting it, she lost the only person who had truly believed in her. Their separation wasn't filled with shouting or tears. It was quiet, like a door closing softly behind someone who knows they'll never return. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and two people who once shared a single dream walked into different worlds. Now, a decade later, that world looked perfect from the outside. Her company thrived, her fortune grew, and tonight she was hosting her most glamorous event yet, the annual charity gala. It was supposed to be her reminder that she still cared, that success hadn't hardened her heart. Yet, as she looked at her reflection, adjusting her diamond earrings, a thought crossed her mind like a whisper from the past. Tonight will be different. Tonight, I'll give back. Maybe that's what I've been missing. By evening, the ballroom glowed with gold light and gentle music. Chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors, and the city's elite floated across the room in designer gowns and sharp suits. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and every camera turned toward her as she made her entrance. Her presence commanded admiration, but her heart felt strangely distant, as though her mind was wandering somewhere she couldn't reach. She smiled. For the photographs, exchanged polite words with donors, and posed beside her own portrait displayed at the center of the hall. But beneath that flawless smile, something inside her stirred. A strange unease, as if someone invisible was calling her name. She moved through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, her heels tapping against the floor with practiced grace. Then, as she turned toward the backstage corridor, her world stopped moving. Her breath caught, her body stiffened. In the corner of her vision, she saw a man lifting boxes near the catering area. Dressed simply, wearing a volunteer's vest, his hair slightly grayed, his movements calm and sure. She didn't need to see his face to know. Her heart recognized him before her mind did, her ex-husband. The sight hit her like a wave, crashing through the walls she had built over the years. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The laughter, the music, the glittering lights. Everything faded into silence. She could only see him, quietly working, avoiding the chaos of the crowd. His hands were still steady, his expression peaceful. The same calm she once resented now made her ache. She took a small step forward, then froze. What would she even say? Hello, after 10 years? I'm sorry? I made it? None of the words seemed right. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her clutch, trying to steady her breath. Finally, he looked up. Their eyes met, and time folded in on itself. 10 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. For a second, it felt as if the distance, the pain, the choices, none of it had existed. But then, just as quickly, reality returned. He gave her a polite nod, the kind you give a stranger at an event, and then turned back to his work as though she were just another guest. Her chest tightened. The moment should have been nothing, yet it felt like everything. Around her, conversations continued. People laughed, the orchestra played, but she heard nothing. All she could feel was the quiet echo of a past she had buried under layers of success. She had always told herself she had moved on. But now, standing there in a hall full of people, she realized something she hadn't dared admit in years. She still remembered him, not with longing, but with something deeper. Guilt, respect, gratitude. She turned away, forcing herself to smile as another guest approached to compliment her event. Her lips moved automatically, her practiced charm masking the storm beneath. But when she caught one last glimpse of him, bending to help a young waiter, calm and kind as ever, a voice inside her whispered softly, "Why does seeing him still hurt?" The night carried on with glitter and chatter, but she couldn't pull her eyes away from him. Every time she tried to focus on a conversation, her gaze drifted to the quiet man at the edge of the crowd, moving between tables, guiding guests, helping servers who spilled drinks, fixing small things no one else noticed. He carried himself with that same calm she remembered so well, that grounded presence that used to make her feel safe when the world felt too heavy. No one in that grand ballroom had any idea who he truly was. To them, he was just another volunteer, someone invisible, there to serve. But she knew better. The man carrying trays tonight was the same man who once carried her through her hardest years. The memory of their early days flickered like a film reel in her mind. Two young dreamers sitting on a torn sofa in their tiny apartment, eating instant noodles, laughing about how they'd make it big one day. They couldn't afford much, but they had hope, and that hope made everything beautiful. She could still see him hunched over their old laptop, helping her design her first business plan, encouraging her every step of the way. When she doubted herself, he'd hold her hand and say, "You've got this. You're already more than you think." He was the calm in her chaos, the reason she kept moving forward. But when success finally came, it didn't arrive quietly. Fame brought flashes, attention, and noise, the kind of noise that drowns out the sound of love. Her priorities shifted, her schedule grew ruthless, and their laughter turned into silence. She began measuring her worth in contracts and awards, while he kept reminding her of the peace they once had. One night, he'd looked at her across the dinner table and said gently, "If you ever forget who you are, success will remind you in the cruelest way." At that time, she thought it was bitterness. But now, standing in this glittering hall, watching him move with quiet grace, she realized it wasn't bitterness at all. It was wisdom. And he had been right. Her assistant interrupted her thoughts, approaching with a clipboard and a nervous smile. "Ma'am, the volunteer, the man near the stage, he's asking if he can leave early. His shift's over." The words snapped her back to the present. She hesitated for a moment, then replied firmly, "Tell him to stay till the end. I'll need his help for the closing." The assistant nodded quickly, unaware of the storm brewing behind her poised expression. The woman turned away, pretending to be absorbed in conversation, but her heart was racing. Why did it matter to her if he stayed? Why was it so hard to breathe, knowing he might leave without saying a word? She excused herself and stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the faint hum of the city below. Lights stretched endlessly, glittering like the life she had built. Vast, impressive, but distant. She leaned against the railing and let her memories take over. She could still see that last moment together, the day they had signed the divorce papers. He had looked at her with tired but kind eyes and said, "You'll do great things. Just don't forget the reason you started." Then he had walked away. No anger, no tears, just quiet acceptance. That line had echoed in her head for years, but tonight it felt louder than ever. When she finally walked back inside, she found him near the stage, kneeling on the floor, fixing a light fixture that had gone out. The sight made her heart ache. Even now, after everything, he was still repairing things others broke. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. For a moment, she just watched him, the man who once knew her better than anyone. Then, softly, she said, "You haven't changed." He looked up at her, eyes warm and familiar, and a small smile touched his lips. "You have," he replied gently, "in the best way." The words caught her off guard. For a second, she couldn't speak. All the things she wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I miss you, thank you," crowded her chest, but none of them found their way out. Instead, she just smiled back, a quiet, trembling smile filled with all the words left unsaid. The moment hung between them, fragile but real. It wasn't awkward, it was honest. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a millionaire or a brand, but as herself. Before she could find the courage to say more, a voice echoed through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're ready to begin the main ceremony." Her assistant rushed over, whispering, "It's time for your speech." She nodded slowly, still looking at him. He stood up, stepping back to let her pass, his eyes calm, his presence unshaken. She wanted to thank him, but instead she only said softly, "Stay close. I'll need your help." He gave a simple nod. As she walked toward the stage, her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a slow heartbeat. Every step felt heavier than the last. The crowd applauded as she climbed the stairs, smiling and radiant under the lights, but inside she was trembling. She looked out at the faces waiting for her words. Investors, reporters, strangers. But her eyes searched for only one face among them, and when she found him, standing quietly near the corner of the stage, she felt something shift inside her. A quiet awakening, a realization that tonight was not just another event. It was the moment where the past would finally meet the present. She took a deep breath, steadied herself behind the podium, and felt the weight of 10 years pressing against her chest. The room went silent as the lights dimmed slightly, and in that stillness, she knew. She was about to speak words that no one in that hall would ever forget. Under the soft shimmer of golden lights, she stood before the crowd, her polished voice echoing through the grand hall. The room was filled with power. Investors, celebrities, socialites, all waiting to be inspired by yet another success story. But tonight, her heart wasn't where the applause was. Her eyes searched past the glittering audience until they found him. The man in the simple black uniform standing quietly near the back, holding a clipboard and avoiding her gaze. For a moment, everything around her faded. The music, the murmurs, the glamour. It all vanished until it was just the two of them, bound by a history no one else in that room could ever understand. When she began to speak, her tone carried a softness that surprised everyone. "Tonight," she said, "I want to talk not about wealth, but about value." A hush fell across the hall. Even the waiters paused, sensing something different in her voice. 10 years ago," she continued, "I met someone who taught me what real success means." A few journalists leaned forward, expecting a motivational story about a mentor or a famous entrepreneur. But she wasn't speaking about anyone they knew. She was speaking from a place buried deep in memory, the place where struggle met love. Her words flowed gently, each sentence more personal than the last. "When I was building my first business, I was broke, scared, and lost. The nights were long, the failures constant. But there was one person who stood by me. He reminded me that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. That the climb means nothing if you forget who you were when you started." The crowd was silent now. Even the clinking glasses had stopped. The man at the back of the room stood completely still, unsure if she could really be talking about him. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Tonight," she said softly, "I want to honor that person, the one who believed in me when no one else did." Her voice quivered, just enough to betray the emotion she was trying to contain. Then she said the words that froze the entire room. "The foundation we launch tonight will carry his name." Gasps filled the air. Her assistant, who had been managing her cues from the side, dropped her clipboard in shock. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure whether they had heard her correctly. The photographers lowered their cameras for a split second, stunned into silence. But she kept speaking, her gaze unwavering. "He may not wear a suit or own a company," she said, "but his integrity is the reason I stand here today. He once told me that money doesn't define us. Our kindness does. I forgot that once. But not anymore." The man looked like he couldn't breathe. His chest rose and fell rapidly as if every word she spoke hit him like a wave. He hadn't come here expecting to be noticed. He had volunteered to help because someone had asked him to fill in for a missing worker, nothing more. Yet now, in front of the most powerful people in the city, his name, once just a memory from her past, was being immortalized as a symbol of gratitude. The applause started slowly, uncertain at first, and then grew into a roaring standing ovation. Every person in that hall, the investors, the executives, even the waiters, joined in. The noise echoed like thunder, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were locked on him, watching as tears welled in his eyes. He shook his head slightly as if to say, "You didn't have to do this." But she smiled faintly, replying without words, "I did." As the applause softened, she stepped down from the podium, the long train of her gown gliding behind her. Each step toward him felt heavier than the last, not from hesitation but from the weight of years, the weight of choices, regrets, and unfinished conversations. When she finally reached him, neither of them spoke. She simply opened her arms and he hesitated for just a moment before embracing her. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was something purer, a reunion of two souls who had seen each other at their best and worst, who had lost everything and still found forgiveness. Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, barely audible, "You were right. Success did remind me. In the cruelest way." He smiled, still holding her, and replied quietly, "Then maybe it was worth it." Cameras flashed around them, but neither seemed to notice. In that moment, the gala, the luxury, the applause, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth standing between them, that love, respect, and humility were worth more than every diamond in that room. When they finally stepped apart, even the richest guests felt something shift inside them. The woman who once represented wealth and ambition had just shown them that the greatest act of success is gratitude. Her gesture had turned a glamorous evening into a lesson about humanity. And as she walked back to the stage to close the event, people weren't just clapping for her achievements anymore, they were clapping for her heart. That night, she didn't go home with trophies or headlines. She went home with peace, the kind that only comes when you finally say thank you to the one who made you who you are. And in that quiet gratitude, she realized what real wealth had always been, the ability to remember where you came from, and the courage to honor it. The hall had emptied, the echoes of applause fading into the quiet hum of the night. The golden glow that once lit the gala had dimmed to a softer warmth, leaving behind traces of confetti and half-empty glasses. She stood near the stage, still in her evening gown, her heels clicking faintly against the marble floor as she watched him carefully pack away the leftover decorations. The sight was almost poetic. The man who had once built her dreams now stacking chairs and folding tablecloths with the same quiet patience he had always shown. For the first time in years, the silence between them didn't ache. It felt peaceful. She walked closer, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You were right," she said softly, almost as if admitting it to herself more than to him. "Success without gratitude feels empty." He paused, glanced up and smiled. That same gentle smile she remembered from years ago. The one that never carried judgment, only understanding. "You found your way back," he said. "That's all that matters." His tone was light, but his eyes told a story of years spent in quiet acceptance. They sat down on the edge of the stage, their reflections dancing in the polished floor beneath them. For a moment they didn't speak, just listened to the soft rustle of the night outside, the faint buzz of a vacuum in another room, and the sound of their own breathing sinking to a rhythm they had once known so well. She looked at him and saw not the man she had left, but the lesson she had once ignored. "I named the foundation after you," she said after a while. "Not as a favor, but as a symbol of everything I forgot, everything pure." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful but kind. "You didn't forget," he replied quietly. "You just got busy chasing the world. It happens." She laughed softly, a sound filled with both relief and regret. "Maybe. But the world isn't worth much without the people who helped you build it." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the now empty hall. "You always did have a way with words," he murmured, and she smiled faintly, remembering the countless nights they had spent building dreams out of nothing but faith and exhaustion. Minutes passed like hours as they sat there, reminiscing, not about the pain or the mistakes, but about the small things that used to matter. The late-night ramen dinners when they couldn't afford takeout. The laughter that made the power outages feel like candlelit dates. The way he used to tell her, "One day, this struggle will be our favorite story." And now, somehow, it was, before he could leave, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a small card. Her personal contact, embossed in gold. She held it out to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you ever want to run the foundation with me, the offer is open." For a long moment he looked at the card but didn't take it. Then, slowly, he smiled and shook his head. "Maybe," he said, "but I think you've got it covered this time." There was no bitterness in his tone. Just trust, the kind that comes from finally letting go. He stood, gathering the last few boxes, and she didn't stop him. She didn't ask for another chance or try to rewrite the past. She just watched as he walked toward the exit, his figure shrinking against the soft glow of the doorway. There was no dramatic goodbye, no tears, only peace. She realized then that sometimes love doesn't need to return to heal. It just needs to be understood. As he disappeared into the night, she stood alone in the vast hall, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that suddenly felt more personal than public. The chandeliers above her glimmered faintly, reflecting in her eyes as she whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for never stopping believing in me." The words carried softly through the empty space, settling in the air like a prayer finally answered. She stepped outside onto the balcony, the city skyline glittering like a river of stars below. The night breeze brushed against her face, and for the first time in years, she felt light. All the awards, the contracts, the deals, they had never brought her this feeling, this quiet redemption, this freedom. She closed her eyes and let the cool air wash over her, as if the universe itself was forgiving her for forgetting where she came from. The narrator's voice softened, almost like a whisper from her own conscience. Sometimes life brings people back not to restart what ended, but to remind us of what was real. She gained the world, but tonight she found her heart again. The camera would pan upward, capturing her standing beneath the fading gala lights as they dimmed behind her, a lone silhouette against the endless sky. Her face calm, her eyes glistening not from sadness but from peace. And as the night deepened, her whisper lingered in the air. Not a confession, but a quiet vow to never forget again. That night, she didn't drive home to her mansion or her awards. She simply sat in her car for a while, looking at the stars, feeling something she hadn't felt in a decade. Gratitude, not for what she had achieved, but for who had helped her begin. In that still moment, she finally understood the truth that success had tried to teach her all along. True success isn't measured by what you own, but by whom you honor. Money can buy applause, but only gratitude earns respect. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, she smiled, knowing she had finally come home. Not to a place, but to herself.